Right, so Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau giving a standing ovation to a literal Nazi should be a major scandal. It's utterly sick and twisted, isn't it? It is rewriting history. It is absolutely horrifying, and the lessons that should never be forgotten from our past, from what people went through before, look to be at risk due to the stupidity of Western leaders and their tub-thumping hatred of all things Russia right now. But going down this road because of how Russia today is led versus the role of Russia during World War II is to in effect forgive the atrocities committed by the Nazis back then, and when Zelensky's Ukraine is known to have Nazis serving in its army now. Are we honestly going to gloss over Nazism in order to position ourselves on the side of Ukraine just to give two fingers to Putin? Surely such propagandising is the most dangerous of narratives. Why do we have to have this black and white view of Russia and Ukraine, seemingly at any cost? Right, so this story has been carried by some media, not many. But last Friday night, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, on another of his drumming up support flesh-pressing missions, was in Canada with their Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at a session of the Canadian Parliament, their House of Commons. Yes, they have one of those too in Canada. Zelensky addressed the House, set out his stall, gave many varied and perfectly justifiable examples of Russian atrocity today, Putin's atrocity, in order to secure ongoing support for the Ukrainian cause, and their House Speaker, Anthony Rota, in a bid to clearly show some solidarity and common ground with Ukraine, chose to recognise a member of the public in attendance up in the gallery, the 98-year-old Yaroslav Hunka, referring to him as a Ukrainian hero and a Canadian hero, and thanked him for his service. The House stood in not one but two separate standing ovations, joined in with by Zelensky and Trudeau. Well, this has caused hell up, and perfectly understandably, and the feigned ignorance being extolled by the Speaker now is falling on deaf ears, frankly, because anyone with just a passing knowledge of the history of the final days of World War II should have known this was a bad idea. Hunka was singled out by the Speaker because he was a Ukrainian who fought against Russia back then, just as Ukraine is doing today, but the circumstances were not the same, to say the very least. Yaroslav Hunka fought as part of the Waffen-SS, the Nazi paramilitary, which was obviously comprised mainly of Germans, but also conscripts and volunteers from across occupied territory, and a not insignificant number of Ukrainians joined too, like Yaroslav Hunka. For as much of a problem Russia is today for the West, and as big an issue as Putin is, during World War II, Russia was our ally. For all the justifiable anger that can be aimed at then-leader Joseph Stalin for a great many things, Hitler happened to be our common enemy. So Ukrainians fighting against Russia then were fighting for Hitler. We're fighting against us. We're fighting against other Western allies, including Canada. In fact, Hunka's division, the 14th Waffen-SS Grenadier Division, also called the Galicia Division, I'll probably mispronounce that now, was actually made up chiefly of Ukrainians who were sold on the idea of an ethnically homogenous Ukrainian state and therefore joined up with a view to ethnically cleanse their lands. So just think about that. Just think about what that means in this context, because you've got Volodymyr Zelensky standing up and giving this guy a fist pump, giving this man applause, when this man was fighting to get rid of Jewish Ukrainians like Zelensky himself, to ethnically cleanse their land of them. But sure, clap, because Russia bad. Needless to say, there's been significant fallout after all of this. The Speaker, Anthony Rota, is claiming full responsibility and saying nobody else knew about his plans, but this doesn't completely wash. You have a Ukrainian former World War II veteran whom you knew had fought against Russia. Therefore, you should have known he was fighting against the Allies. You can't convince me that every single person in that parliament, and it was full, was ignorant of that fact. That's a given. Russia were on our side at that time. It was the day Russia arrived in Berlin that Hitler killed himself. It was Russia that liberated Auschwitz. 27 million Russians died. I know people like to say the UK won the war, but we turned up after. Those people in Parliament in Canada, some of them knew, and still they stood and clapped. And that is horrible optics. That sends a horrifying message, and of course Jewish groups, amongst others, have been up in arms about it. There's no arguing that this act was, by its nature, anti-Semitic, because these people wanted to exterminate people of the Jewish faith. It was Jew hate. The real thing. You just clapped in solidarity with that. The Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Centre, a Canadian-based Holocaust education organisation named after a Holocaust survivor who later turned Nazi hunter, issued a statement on all this, saying, The fact that a veteran who served in a Nazi military unit was invited to and given a standing ovation in Parliament is shocking. At a time of rising anti-Semitism and Holocaust distortion, it is incredibly disturbing to see Canada's Parliament rise to applaud an individual who was a member of a unit in the Waffen-SS, a Nazi military branch responsible for the murder of Jews and others, and that was declared a criminal organisation during the Nuremberg trials. There should be no confusion that this unit was responsible for the mass murder of innocent civilians with a level of brutality and malice that is unimaginable. An apology is owed to every Holocaust survivor and veteran of the Second World War who fought the Nazis, and an explanation must be provided as to how this individual entered the hallowed halls of Canadian Parliament and received recognition from the Speaker of the House and a standing ovation. It's not the only thing that needs explaining, though, as this is yet another example of Ukraine's apparent problem with Nazism, and that is all despite people constantly excusing Zelensky by saying he's Jewish. It doesn't appear to matter. Surely as a Ukrainian Jew, for one, he should be more than familiar with the history of his Nazi collaborating countrymen there, but instead he offered him the same praise as everyone else. It should have horrified him, but it didn't. Why should it really, when we know from the Azov and Adar battalions in Ukraine that Zelensky is fully aware of having Nazis within his own armed forces? It isn't much of a secret anymore. Not only were there Ukrainians fighting in Hitler's army in World War II, though, equally there were Ukrainians fighting in Stalin's Red Army as well. Once upon a time, there were monuments celebrating their efforts in freeing the country from tyranny across Ukraine. But these have been torn down since. The real danger here, in my view, is that the war in Ukraine today is being used as an excuse to rewrite history. Russia and Putin have invaded. There's no denying that. There's no denying the illegality of such an action, and it should be condemned, to put it politely. But without Russia in World War II, 70-odd years ago, the Allies would almost certainly have lost the war. They were key to liberating humanity from Nazism. And by rewriting history, Nazi collaborators like this old man in Canada are getting rehabilitated. We cannot let that happen. We cannot let that slide. You can't let it pass. We have to speak out. We all have a responsibility to do so. If we're to prevent such widespread global terror and atrocity from ever happening again on that scale. This is the sort of story everyone should be condemning and covering, regardless of their political views and leanings. And regular viewers of mine will certainly know that I don't stray too often into world news events. So often there's enough going on here in the UK that I don't have to. But some things are just too important to not say something, to not cover. And on this, frankly, I owe it, we all owe it to those who gave their lives to fight this, to stop it ever happening again. We need to stand up and be counted and say our piece, especially when so many of those who have a big voice, a big media presence, are remaining silent. Ukraine had a Nazi problem back in the day. It still has one today. And its leaders and too many in our media still turn a blind eye to it. Yes, Ukraine got invaded. It doesn't mean it's a country not awful in and of itself in several respects too. So let's temper our support for them with our eyes being wide open to that. What do you make of this incident in Canada, though? The Speaker appears to want to fall on his sword, but can the likes of Zelensky and Trudeau really get off without some formal kind of apology and acknowledgement of how awful this has come across? How horrible it must be to be Jewish and witnessing that spectacle. Let me know your views in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily, of course. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Sharon Graham's Unite Union have recently supported a TUC motion expressing solidarity with Ukraine, despite Zelensky having also used the current war to clamp down on workers' rights in his country. That's a really good look for a trade union then, as you can imagine, and I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.